action inspiring. As a way of just brief background, how I got involved in training for this Climate Interactive En-ROADS program. A little over 2 years ago when I retired, I was trying to figure out how to best use my free time in a meaningful way, and came to the conclusion that climate change is a defining issue of our time. So as I started to do some research and how I might fit into that goal, I had several inspirations along the way, from everyone from Al Gore to Greta Thunberg, an amazing young teenager from Sweden. So I was also inspired as I was doing more research by Project Drawdown, which is, if you go onto their website, is a website that's also focused on 100 solutions to the climate crisis. And I would recommend that you check them out. It's complementary to what we're doing today. So I found out about En-ROADS and the Climate Interactive site through the Citizens Climate Lobby local chapter in Tucson. Has some information on it. So when I checked it out, I became intrigued by the model and by its scientific rigor and versatility. So with that, I'll just offer a disclaimer. I'm certainly not an expert by any means, but I feel like I have a working knowledge at this point after using it for close to the last year to serve as a guide. So again, this is designed to be interactive. So it's important that you feel comfortable giving feedback and offer, sharing your thoughts and asking questions. So I am going to use a few slides that just are from Climate Interactive, just at the start and also at the wrap up, just to kind of set the stage a little bit. So let me get to my slides here. Let's see here. So En-ROADS is a acronym that stands for Energy, Rapid Overview, and Decision Support. And it is a powerful climate solutions model that was developed by Climate Interactive in conjunction with the MIT Sustainability Initiative and some other partners. And it's grounded in the best available science on climate impacts and solutions. It is based on a global model, so any of the changes you make, the assumption is that it's done on a planet-wide basis. But this model allows the participants to explore and manipulate 18 different variables that would help in terms of mitigation, with the goal of limiting global warming to that Paris Agreement level, a range of 1.5 to 2 degrees centigrade. So I like this quote from Buckminster Fuller because I think it relates to the model. If you want to teach people a new way of thinking, don't bother trying to teach them. Instead, give them a tool, the use of which will lead to new ways of thinking. So this is just a photo of what the model looks like when you bring it up. And we'll go over the details here in a sec, but what I'd like to comment now is that Climate Interactive is dedicated to keeping this model up to date. And in fact, they did a major update earlier this month. And Karen may notice some changes, but the key change is that the temperature up in the upper right-hand corner, projected temperature by the year 2100 is 3.6 degrees. Now, before this recent update, it was actually 4.1 degrees centigrade. So that's going in the right direction, but still a 3.6 degree world and 2100 is a miserable proposition.
Kurt, I'm sorry to interrupt. Kurt,
Sure.
did you want slides showing?
Oh, you're not seeing them?
No, we're not seeing slides.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So start the program that you're looking at.
Don't know why. Let me get to this here. Okay. We have it now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. Listening to me babble on. You should interrupt sooner next time, Karen. I'm not the most tech savvy, so.
I'm sorry, I thought maybe you were waiting to show them. Anyway.
Anyway, the first few slides, you're not missing that much in terms of, let me go back one. And so this is just a picture of the model. And again, we'll go over the details of that in a moment. And this is a busy slide, but it describes what each of the variables is from the standpoint of the model. And I'm not going to take the time to go over each one of these items, but we'll do it as we work with the model. Okay, so let's see if I can get to the simulator now. Still over here. Well, get up here. There it is. Okay. Can you see that? Are people able to see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so this is when you bring up the model in En-ROADS, in Climate Interactive, you're going to see this screen. And so there's quite a bit of detail here, so I'm not going to go into too deep into the weeds, but if I'm going too fast, or if you need a question about something, please indicate so that I can try and address your question. And again, I should say that if you do have questions and we can't figure out the answer to the questions, I will find out from Climate Interactive and get back to you.
Yes, and let me just quickly say, you can put your questions in the chat box, and then also after Kurt's presentation, we'll just raise hands. I'll call on people.
All righty. So I'll just go along the top here first, and it might be hard to see some of the model, like depending on where your video depictions are from the Zoom. If you need to, you might have to minimize that, which is what I'm going to do. Anyway, along the top here, you have several different topics. Simulation is just the assumptions that the model uses. So if you click on that, you get all these assumptions down here. And this, again, gets into quite a bit of detail. And if you click on an arrow, you'll find out some of the specifics for, in this case, climate system sensitivities, subsidies, but I don't want to get into all of these details right now. It'll probably be a little too much to absorb. One of the important things to understand about the model is there's lots of different graphs you can look at. There's two default graphs that come up on the left and right, but there are almost 100 different graphs you can look at. And there are different ways to access these graphs. You can click on this, and as you go down, you're going to see lots of different graphs. Those are all for the left side. This is for the right side. So say if I wanted to see sea level rise, then that changes that to that. So lots of graphs. There's other ways to get to the graphs. You can actually click on one of the graph titles and that'll bring you up to that. Another way you can get to the graphs is right over here where it's miniature graphs. And this will show 12 of the more commonly used graphs. And the default graph on the right now is this one. The default before their last update was temperature change, which I think for the purposes of our workshop, I think it might be easier to use. So again, this is projected temperature change throughout the century from the year 2000 to 2100. And with any of these graphs, if you just track your cursor right along the line, you'll find out what the projected number is. Like right now, our increase in global temperatures is at about 1.1, 1.2 centigrade above pre-industrial levels. And so the black line is baseline, or if we would not take any further significant actions or kind of business as usual. The blue line is the one we want to try and move. We want to try and move that blue line so that it fits in here between 2 and 1.5 degrees centigrade. So that's the right side graph. The left side graph, the default is this one about global sources of primary energy. And the reason I use that is that the production and use of energy accounts for about 2/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions. So that's why they decided to use that graph as the default. The other third of emissions comes from land use and other gases like methane and nitrous oxide and F gases. So again, on this one, you can, same thing, if you say we want to know in 2040 how much energy there will be from gas, then this is going to give you an estimate of that. So in terms of energy sources, this shows all the fossil fuels, coal in brown, oil in red, natural gas in blue. Then this is renewables. This is biomass. It's burning biomass for energy. And that thin blue line is nuclear. So along the bottom are the 18 variables that you can manipulate to see if you can get a combination of actions that will get that temperature down to a livable level. So there are 8 that relate to energy. And you have the fossil fuels, you have bioenergy, renewables, nuclear, new zero carbon, which would be something like thorium fission or maybe nuclear fusion, something like that. And then carbon pricing. Then there's 2 each for transport, for buildings and industry, for growth, for land and industry emissions, and then 2 for carbon removal techniques or strategies. So all of these have sliders. So to make a change, you can just hold and slide, and this would be subsidizing coal, which I hope won't be one of the actions we consider. Or the other way would be taxing coal. So you can click on it like that to change it, or you can slide it if you want. Either way works. If you want to find out more about a particular item, a particular strategy, then you click on these 3 dots, what they call the advanced pane. And when you go into that, you'll get more information. So it'll talk about discouraging mining coal, burning in power plants, that it's the most harmful fuel in terms of emissions, as well as air pollutants that cause severe health impacts. But that it's a dominant source of energy globally, partly because it's abundant, it's cheap to mine and to transport. Below it, you have, again, if you want to jump into the details of manipulating the assumptions, you can do that. Otherwise, the default assumption is right here. On the right, when you click on this, you're going to get a graph that relates to coal. And so this one is coal primary energy demand. There are other graphs that you can click that are related to. So you could do market price of electricity. How's it going to change? So those are the graphs that are associated. Now, this is where you can find out more information about this particular variable in terms of when you manipulate why something happens or why something doesn't happen. So there's an I here. There's also this I up here. If you click on the I up here, though, you're going to go to the comprehensive user guide for the entire model. But if you want to find out more just for this specific topic, then you click on this. And this is going to show examples of things that are done in terms of phasing out power plants, limiting their access to capital. Then they give you big messages for this item. Discouraging coal is a high leverage strategy. They use the term leverage a lot, whether a particular action is high leverage, meaning that it is going to probably have more of an impact on global warming as opposed to something that's lower leverage. So it gives you the big messages for that. So it's improving public health, and then this explains some of the dynamics of why when you do something with coal, say if we do a really high tax on coal, you can see what happens. It doesn't go down dramatically, but it goes down a couple tenths. Every tenth is important. Which reminds me, up on top, one of the things, a couple things I didn't talk about here are if you want to replay what you just did to kind of look at what happens with the graphs, you click this and it'll replay it 3 times. Also up here, if you want to reset your graphs, this will change it back to the default graphs, which I don't want to do right now because I want to keep this temperature graph. And this one will reset your assumption. So this will kind of wipe the slate clean like that. Anyway, going back down to the information here. So there's, it shows you co-benefits of discouraging coal. They also use the term, Climate Interactive uses the term multi-solving, so that when you do something that, to help the climate, you can also have other co-benefits. And this is particularly profound with coal. There's many deaths from coal and the burning of coal, and also in terms of protection of the ecosystem. I also like that they include equity issues, so that if you put a big tax on coal, you have to think about the costs that it's going to incur for households and businesses, and also that low-income communities may be impacted more. So again, this is a helpful place to find out more information. To get out of that, you just exit out. So, so questions at this point?
Go ahead and unmute yourself and just jump right in if you have questions.
Okay, so I am going to go back to slides just for a minute, and then we're going to come back and work with the model. So let me see if I can do this without getting too messed up here. There it is. Get rid of that mail. Okay. So let me, I'm bringing this slide up just to indicate that for the last bullet point, that En-ROADS is designed to help with kind of problem solving kind of discussions to learn and strategize using their data and science. But they warn you, you really shouldn't use this as a prediction for the future, because that's dependent on too many behavioral variables. So just to reiterate what I talked about with that left side graph, you can see about 2/3 of CO2 emissions come from fossil fuels, and the rest come from land use and other gases. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with this temperature increase scenario from pre-industrial to current, and that this rate of increase has not happened in, last time I heard, 800,000 plus years. So again, even though that 3.6 was a projected increase was better than 4.1, these are just some of the effects you can see if there is more than a 3-degree increase in warming. Yeah, lots of devastating changes. So the question is, what do we do? So again, this is that picture of that right side graph that I want to use. So our mission today is to see if we can get that blue line down between the two red dotted lines there. So in terms of what is it going to take to limit warming? Climate Interactive lists 4 key areas: fewer people, less consumption, more efficiency, and less use of high carbon energy sources. So as we're going through this process, keep a couple things in mind. Again, with multi-solving, think of other co-benefits that might occur from your proposal. And also kind of on the opposite side, what potential things might be harmful. So just keep that in mind as we go along. All right, so let's get back to the model. And so this is the interactive part. So just based on any of you folks' past experience or things that you've been involved in or that resonate with you in terms of things that might help. We just like some suggestions, and we'll try those out on the model and see how they affect things and then go from there.
All right. Now, again, if you have join in but first you got to unmute yourself. That little icon on the left side of your screen.
Well, let's increase renewables.
Okay, so we can do that. That's right here. And so you have a choice in how much you increase. And by increase, that means we're increasing the subsidies. So you can do it partially or all go for the gusto. So tell me which amount you'd like to do.
Oh, let's go for the gusto.
Okay, good. So do you think this is going to be a dramatic change in this temperature here? What's your guess?
I think it's going to be a moderate change.
Okay, so let's see. So that was fairly modest. So any thoughts about why it wasn't a bigger change?
We haven't reduced the carbon emitters.
Right, you have to reduce the sources of the energy for, you have to reduce these because these are still going to compete. So if we replay this, where we increase renewables, the subsidy for renewables, the green area does increase, but you still have significant amounts of the fossil fuels that are contributing to the overall energy infrastructure. Okay, but again, every 10th helps. So other suggestions?
What if we reduce dependency on coal?
Okay, So again, how much do you want to, and this means taxing coal here.
Taxing coal?
Yes, that's what it would mean.
Well, let's tax it as heavily as possible.
Okay, so any thoughts? Is this gonna dramatically change things in terms of temperatures, projected temperatures?
No, it's going to be a minor change.
Okay, let's see. So it was, again, a couple more tenths down. And again, if we want to replay this just to look to see what happens. So you look at the brown here, and coal goes down, but actually as you go to 2100, it starts going up again. Part of the reason for that is that coal, when I clicked on that detail for coal, it told you that, coal is, it's abundant and it's easy to mine and transport. And so particularly as a lot of the developing world continues to develop, there's a likelihood, unless there's other changes, for them to use coal. So that's why it actually, in this projection would go up again. Anyway, but we're chipping away. Other suggestions?
What about increasing funding for nuclear?
Okay, so that's here. So by increasing funding, that would be subsidizing it in this case.
Right.
So any thoughts about that?
Yeah, as much as possible.
Okay. Do you think it's going to affect things very much?
Well, it has in Scandinavia, supposedly.
Okay, so let's look here. So we're at 3.3. If you look, it changed the temperature in Fahrenheit a tenth, but not in centigrade. So let's look at nuclear just a little bit here and see if we can get some more information about this. So what this is saying is nuclear is not a huge driver of future temperature increases, and it competes with renewables and zero carbon. So the reason it doesn't change too much is that it's not changing things too much to de-incentivize, again, fossil fuels or anything like that. So, and again, for a lot of people, this is a non-starter just because they're concerned about the environmental costs. So again, so you look at co-benefits and threats, there's some of these issues that come up here, equity considerations, and as usual, power plants, whether they're nuclear or fossil fuel, lots of times are in communities of lower income communities or communities of color. So keeping those kind of things in mind too.
Hey, Kurt?
Yeah.
Under renewables, is it a general term for renewables? Is nuclear within the renewables category? What are the renewables they're using?
Renewables are solar, geothermal, and wind primarily, and hydropower.
Okay.
Like it notes here, though, that nuclear and bioenergy are considered separately.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
oh yeah, that explains.
So we're not repeating ourselves by saying renewables and bioenergy.
Nuclear.
Okay.
No, they're separate categories. Okay, so again, we're chipping away gradually. Any other thoughts? Anything that you think might have a higher leverage kind of effect?
Get rid of subsidies for oil.
Okay, so that would be here.
Mhm.
So any thoughts in terms of what's going to happen to temperature change with this?
More significant.
Okay, so let's take a look. So you want me to go for the gusto here, right?
Yeah.
Okay, really stick it to those, to Exxon, right?
That's
Okay, so it did have some change. It had a little more change. It docked it down to 3.1. Now, one of the things that, one of the phrases that Climate Interactive likes to use is called squeeze the balloon. So with fossil fuels, if you inhibit the use of one of them, then sometimes the others will increase in terms of response to, so if you just kind of pick on one, then sometimes so if you can kind of see natural gas and oil and coal actually go up a little bit when you subsidize or tax coal. But it did make a difference. So again, other ideas or suggestions? Got lots of other topics here.
What about reducing the rate of population growth?
Okay, and that's controversial sometimes. Well, it depends on how you do that. But so that would be decreasing this direction. So you want to do kind of a moderate or a more dramatic?
I think just moderate is all you can really expect.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's look at that again. Okay, so it went down, if you look at Fahrenheit, it went down a tiny bit, didn't go down that. And again, part of the reason that this is probably not changing, again, we can look in here. We'll take a peek over here. So they talk about ways to kind of more ethically reduce population growth through women's education, access to family planning, as opposed to like a China policy. So let's see, they say contrary to people's beliefs, population growth is not a silver bullet. They use that term. So rather than a silver bullet to fix climate change, they talk about silver buckshot, which just means you've got to have lots of different solutions working together. Anyway, so with lower population, you're going to decrease consumption of resources. But on the other hand, again, as more and more people are pulled out of poverty, they tend to consume more. So I think that's probably the reason that we don't see a more dramatic change with population, slowing down population. But so, right now, if you look at population right now, by 2100, it's supposed to be almost 11 billion people, whereas right now it's 7.8 billion, somewhere in there. So, if you look at one of the things in Project Drawdown, one of the bigger things that they emphasize as a thing that you can do is women's education, like things like Malala is doing, as well as access to family planning. Okay, so other ideas?
How about the energy efficiency of buildings and industry?
Okay, so let's see what that is first, to see what that is. So that's increasing the efficiency of buildings, appliances, other machines, through insulation, reducing the amount of energy factories use, energy efficient practices that also sometimes can help improve the health of people. Okay, so how much everyone seems to want to go for the gusto except for population at this point.
Yeah, let's do that.
So go for the gusto. So we're at 3.1. So that had a fairly significant increase, didn't it? So if we look at that again.
Retrofitting particularly.
Yeah, and that's very doable. So that's a fairly decent leverage action to take. So we're down in the 2s now. So, okay, other ideas, suggestions?
How about afforestation, carbon removal?
Okay, so that's planting trees. So planting new forests and restoring old forests. So the trees grow, they draw carbon out of the air. Okay, so our mayor here has a goal of planting 1 million trees.
Right.
So if that happened on a planet-wide basis, a very aggressive afforestation program, what are the thoughts in terms of that? How much leverage that might have in knocking down this temperature?
I think it ought to be great.
Okay, let's see.
Oh,
This isn't necessarily bad news. So let's look at this again here. Now there's some reasons for this. One of the things that you have to keep in mind is that when you plant forests, they take a while to grow, and they take, so they're not going to change things quickly from the standpoint of pulling carbon out of the air. The other issue is, and from what different experts I've talked to, there's some controversy about this in terms of the land area that's needed to have a significant difference. They're saying like the land area of India might, even if we planted that area, we might not see much of a change in temperature. So there's a question of land use and how do you best use land use. The other thing is you have to avoid planting kind of monocultures where it's just trees and not multi-story type vegetation. But there's other benefits that make this still important. It improves biodiversity, reduces, this is one of the things in Tucson that it would really help with urban heat island and by increasing the canopy in the area, and it creates jobs. Again, if you look at equity considerations, you're, again, this issue of shifting land use into forests. And sometimes you can affect like indigenous peoples and others in terms of you decide to use the land for that purposes. So there's a lot of dynamics that go into afforestation. But it, again, is, I think, an important thing for, even if it doesn't have a short-term significant increase and decrease in the temperature, it definitely has so many other benefits that I think it's important that we pursue it. Okay, so we're down to 2.7. Other ideas, suggestions.
What does that new zero carbon mean?
Okay, well, let's look. So we'll click on the advanced pane here. So it's discover a brand new source of electricity that doesn't emit greenhouse gases. Could be, like I said, nuclear fusion, thorium-based fission. So, but there's unknown risks. The other thing that happens is how long it takes to scale this up. But so that's, to me, an important message with all this is that we can't wait for some as yet undiscovered silver bullet, because even if we do, the scale up time is going to probably compromise its ability to make a difference. I think most of us know that this decade of the 2020s is critical for us to start really moving this curve down.
Well, let's reduce subsidies for natural gas.
Okay, so we're getting the last of the fossil fuels here, and I assume you want to go for the gusto, huh?
Sure. Yeah,
Okay, so it knocked it down a little bit more.
wow, not much.
Okay, so again, it's chipping away, but it's still going to be used. So even though there's taxes on it, it's not quite enough to get it sort of. If you look way out here, yeah, it's decreasing quite a bit. But again, this is kind of this critical time, 2020 to 2030, kind of in this range, that we really need things to really decrease with fossil fuels. to reduce emissions. So it takes longer for it. One of the issues with the fossil fuels is the infrastructure, the plants that you build for them have a long lifetime, 30 years or more. And so there's going to be a tendency to want to keep using those throughout their lifetime. So
Can we couple that with the methane emissions reduction?
sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see what all this includes, because it includes some things that you might not think about. So this is reducing greenhouse gas emissions from methane. So they have the poor demonized cow and its burps and farts, and nitrous oxide and F gases, which are the refrigerants.
There's more coming also from melting of permafrost.
Exactly. And that's kind of an unknown ticking time bomb for sure.
Yeah.
So if we look over here, this is going to give you a little more information about, so one of the strategies like in drawdown is a plant-based diet. So this is kind of where this strategy fits into this model. So we're talking about decreased meat consumption will reduce the production of methane related to agriculture. And some of the other agricultural practices that produce methane. And then it also comes from leakage from oil and gas. And so notice this is saying this is high leverage. So we'll have to see when we make a change in here how much leverage it does have. Other co-benefits, plant-based diets are shown to be healthier. Sustainable, regenerative type agriculture can produce more food with fewer resources, improving food security, things like that. Equity considerations, in terms of, there's cultural things with foods, things like that. So all of this, these things are complicated, but they're doable. Okay, so how much do you want to try and reduce methane and other greenhouse gas emissions here?
How about 75%?
So about here, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're at 2.6. That was pretty significant.
Yeah.
We're almost down to 2.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So
There's a interesting story a week or so ago. People who don't want to give up their beef, they were saying that seaweed, you dry seaweed and you sprinkle it across the food for your cattle and your cows, it actually reduces their flatulence.
Oh,
yeah, I've read the same thing. Although I think that more of the methane actually comes from their burping, is what I've read.
Well, it's supposed to soothe their stomach, but anyway.
Yeah, no, I've read the same thing. So, and I think the other thing that I've read about the production, animal agriculture, is it really depends on how it's raised. If it can be raised in a more sustainable way, that it's going to have much less effects from an emissions standpoint. So,
Well, I have another question on this to include, or I don't see it, so maybe I'm just not looking at the right place. What about reducing our consumption? For instance, oil, plastic is made from oil or from, what if is there something that talks about consumption?
well, it depends on what you mean by consumption. If you mean overall consumption practice.
Basically, yeah. I mean, you can't break it. I mean, you could break it down to plastics or cardboard, but I mean,
that probably fits best in here in economic growth, or
Okay.
what you could also call GDP.
okay.
So yeah, this is it's a key driver in energy consumption.
Yeah.
So if you look at that, again, as more and more of the world's population gets pulled out of, like I said earlier, gets pulled out of poverty, there's a tendency for consumption to increase, which would be going this way.
Right.
And I know everyone's always talking about higher GDPs and things, but a lot of that in the long term is not probably sustainable. So if we wanted like a lower level of growth, what do people think the potential is for that to impact the projected temperature?
Significant.
Yeah, very significant.
Okay, so how far down do you want me to move this?
Yeah, start with half because we don't want to destroy everyone's hopes and
Right.
dreams. Let's start with half.
Well, okay, so we're at 2.2. Ooh, so we're getting close.
Okay.
The reason it probably didn't have more dramatic effect is you've already done other things to take the temperature down.
So what if you go further down, like 75% or 100?
The Fahrenheit went down a
Yeah,
little
so-
bit more, but not a whole lot.
Yeah.
So again, if you look at economic growth, and we look at the information over here, so there's lots of questions about how slower growth would occur and that it's done in an equitable way. So co-benefits. So they talk about focus shifting to alternative measures of prosperity other than GDP, such as people's well-being, as gross national happiness, GNH. I don't know if we'll get to that point or not, but you
We'll
might-
move to Denmark, we will.
yeah, we'd all be happy then. So yeah, again, there are equity considerations with this, but we do, as you remember, one of the keys that Climate Interactive said was less consumption.
Yeah.
So we need to start to learn, I think, to live a little more simply,
Yeah.
not be so acquisitive, perhaps, in our habits. So we're almost to 2.
How about deforestation?
Okay, yeah, that's a favorite one. So in any sense for how dramatic this change may be?
Oh, 75% of what's showing.
Oh, about here, okay.
Yeah.
All right, so let's see what happens. So it got us down to 2. Now, it's deforestation is not as high leverage as people lots of times think it will be. And this is the reason why here. They're relatively low leverage for the climate because the influence from energy CO2 emissions is so dominant, but it's still important in terms of an address thing, obviously. And again, it's important for biodiversity, indigenous rights, so many other things that it's an important thing. We don't, at this rate, the Amazon rainforest under Bolsonaro is going to completely disappear. So it's important, but just to understand why it didn't have a more dramatic drop, that's why. So we're down to 2. So we've gotten in that range, but anyone want to try any other sliders?
Well, I'm going to just throw out that, the Biden administration and the city of Tucson are looking at energy efficiency and in buildings and industry and transportation. So anything there with electrification of vehicles, but
Like
then, and that's all tied to the fuels themselves. So let's see.
Mm-hmm. So if we increase electrification, and again, you have to remember this is done on a planet-wide basis. So that's one of the complicating things with the model. But greenhouse gases don't know boundaries anyway. So you have to use, I think it makes sense to use a planet-wide. But if we do that, it knocked it down a little bit more. There is one other high leverage component that people have not looked at here during today's session that I would suggest that we try. There's actually a couple, but there's one in particular. Any guesses?
Technological.
Carbon price?
Yeah, this is one of the higher leverage things that we can do. So if we look at carbon pricing, so that's setting the carbon price for the fossil fuels and in some cases bioenergy. The issue with this is that when you do this, the energy producers pass on the costs. So if you're familiar with like Citizens Climate Lobby, their solution to this is they're promoting, I think it's House Bill 763, it's the Carbon Fee and Dividend Act. And their idea is that you put a fee on the fossil fuels, but then all the money generated from that goes back as a dividend to the population as a whole. And I think with some income restrictions, I think, like the richest might not necessarily get a dividend. So to help them in the process of adapting to that change. So anyhow, so if we do a carbon price, so this is again setting a certain price per ton on emissions on primarily the fossil fuels. Until I just read that, again, I'm still learning things when I read this. I didn't realize they were including bioenergy in that too, which is this. But bioenergy probably makes sense to include it because that is burning vegetation, either forest waste or trees that are grown actually for that process, but that emits CO2. So it's definitely a double-edged sword. It's not probably a strong thing to do. So let's go back to carbon price here. So should we really, like we did with this, really stick things to them or be
Sure.
nicer?
Sure.
So we'll go up here. Okay, so we're at 1.9. So this had a fairly significant,
Wow.
we've already knocked it down quite a bit. So that got us down to 1.6. So congratulations, you through a combination of different strategies, you've gotten the planet down to a little more livable level. So questions, comments, anything else you want to try before I kind of go back to a few slides to kind of do some wrap up and some get some feedback from you.
Are we missing anything that would have significant impact?
Higher leverage. Again,
Technological.
yeah, and again, this is technologies to pull carbon dioxide out of the air. Afforestation is the natural way to do it, but there are technologies that are being developed to actually remove carbon dioxide from the air, direct air capture, or sometimes it's combined with bioenergy where they capture it and then they store it, I think, below earth. Biochar is a way of doing that. It has as it says here, it has a potential to pull significant amounts of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. The thing is, it would take a while for these to scale up to have an effect.
Mhm.
So, but it does have can have a fairly significant effect. So if there's if we do this to the max here, that knocked it down quite a bit, didn't it?
Wow.
But you can see it doesn't start to have much more effect until, 25 years from now. So we don't have 25 years. But again, in terms of down the road, and that means, working on the technologies now to get them scaled up, it definitely can make a difference. So it'd be nice to have it down to 1.1 again, which is pretty close to where we're at now.
Can I ask something
Sure.
about the the transport and buildings and industry, they each have a section of electrification and a section of efficiency.
Right.
So when, can you explain that?
So for transport, energy efficiency would be things like improving the efficiency of transportation, hybrid cars, increase public transit, using bikes to get around or e-bikes, things like that. So not necessarily electrifying the transport vehicles, but improving their efficiency. So if we do that, changed it a little bit, but not a ton.
How about electrification of buildings and industry? What effect does that have?
So it knocked it down a little more. So, so this is an example of silver buckshot. You know, you have a lot of different things that coupled together have brought that curve down. If this is probably an optimistic scenario, given how polarized things are nowadays, but if in this kind of scenario, by 2030, we'd still be below 1.5. But if we can just get to where we're in this range, we're going to avoid some of the more draconian effects of climate change. So if you wanted to focus on just a few higher leverage things, I can show you just a combination of things that you could do without having to do so many things. The problem with that, though, from my perspective, is that I think we're more likely to do better if we have a broader approach to this, as opposed to just focusing on a couple things, even though they're higher leverage. But let me show you one thing here. I'm gonna, does anyone have any more questions about this before I wipe the slate clean?
No, I don't.
Mm-mm.
Okay, so we're gonna just erase the chalkboard here. Okay, so now we're back, unfortunately, to 3.6. So let's look at some higher leverage things. So watch carbon pricing when you do that by itself without doing anything individually to any of these. Look how much that knocked it down, almost a full degree. Another high leverage thing is this here. If you do methane, we're almost down to 2 already. Let's see. Long-term high leverage, this will knock it down. So I did 3 things and I knocked it down to 1.7. So, you know, the problem is, again, I think it's probably not realistic to think that we're going to get approval for, so like a carbon price here right now, this would be starting next year would be a price of almost $250 per ton of CO2. Not likely we're going to be able to do that right away. Maybe we could get it here, maybe 120 or something like that.
So does that mean that industries producing carbon are required to pay to the government $119 per ton that they emit?
Yeah, yes, that they produce on that, exactly. And then again, if we ended up having like a fee, price and dividend kind of thing, then those monies generated would come back to the people, hopefully, particularly those more affected by the increased, at least in the short term, energy prices. So it's like any solution. It's got a double-edged sword, but in terms of keeping fossil fuels in the ground, it's one of the more effective ones. I know many economists support it too. So it's, again, one of the things you can do to really have a significant impact.
Yeah, and you know, California's doing, and I think the Northeast states are coming up with something like that. It's not as, industry doesn't object to it as much as we might think, because they understand, there's going to be a price to pay.
Right,
So,
right.
it's an interesting solution.
And they're gonna pass the price along to
Yeah,
their
they know.
consumers too.
That's right. They know where their money, they'll make it up from.
Well, so, again, one of the ideas with the carbon price is it reduces demand because the price goes up. But again, that's why I'm attracted to something like the dividend program. Well, it may not be perfect, but at least it's recycling the money back, hopefully closer to the people most affected by it. So, any other questions before? I was going to go through just a few more slides and then ask for just a little more feedback and we can wrap up.
Is this available for any organizations to use?
Yes, it's open source. You just go on to climateinteractive.org and click on the En-ROADS simulator and you can pull this right up. And then if you want into other information about it, you can go to their, like I said up here, you can go to their user guide and that'll tell you more. If someone's really motivated, they can, like me, can do the training to become a climate ambassador if you want. But the whole idea with this is they wanting to get, I believe they said 7,000 climate ambassadors trained so that there'd be one per, I see that'd be 1 per million in the world just to spread the word about this. So
And is there a charge for the training?
no, not at all, not one penny. And you can actually, I think they're going to do a live training in February. So it's 7 or 8 sessions that you go through, about an hour each, and they're really good. If you don't want to wait for that, you can just do them. They're available, and you can just watch the videos, and then you just have to do a little test and do a few practice trials, presenting the workshop to friends or neighbors or something, and get some feedback, and that's about it.
I think this is something that young people would like, even kids. They're,
Yeah,
children are really concerned about, as we all know, they're very concerned. And this is, it looks a little busy, but it's very easy to maneuver once you understand the interface.
Well,
I
and
really do think young people could enjoy this.
well, they understand it better than the other generations do anyway. They actually, En-ROADS has a component that's, it uses the model, but teachers already are using it as an assignment for their students
Great.
to do this. I want class, I want you to come up with a scenario that gets the temperature down.
Oh, see, that's perfect. Kids would love
Yeah.
it. Young people.
And
would
then
love it.
they can send their scenario to their teacher. So so there are things you can do with it for sure. Other questions before I just go to a couple more slides? Okay, let me just go back to the slides here. I got back to Buckminster there.
Bucky.
Okay, so even one of the things to remember is even if we keep it to 2 degrees centigrade by 2100, this is what's projected to happen. 90% of the coral reefs still bleached, drought 4 months longer, 50% of the world's population exposed to lethal heat. Even if we hold it to 1.5, look at some of the changes that are, that happened. That's one of the reasons I've appreciated. I know Barbara Warren. I don't think she's here today, but she, in the Physicians for Social Responsibility chapter, talk about resilience, particularly resilience for heat. Here, I think as a planet, we're going to need to develop, and especially the developed nations, because we're the ones that have more of the resources. We're going to have to become more resilient to help weather the changes that are coming ahead. So, just get some more feedback from you folks. So, any surprises, insights, or takeaways that you'd like to share?
Yes, I'd like to say that I read a book about conversion in Sweden, I think primarily to nuclear, and it sounded like a silver bullet. And so now I'm hearing other, and that's good to be seeing the total picture.
Yeah, I definitely don't think nuclear is a silver bullet, because it won't. The fossil fuel plants are still going to be there. And unless we do something to de-incentivize them, they're still going to be pumping out greenhouse gases, regardless if there's more and more nuclear. And again, some of them are used for things other than just energy production too. So like plastics and things like that. So.
And they're very, very expensive to build.
True, yeah.
And they haven't gotten a way to deal with the waste.
Right.
Right.
They're on the way out here.
Right. Not that's acceptable at this point, for sure.
Well, after Fukushima, I mean, the industry took a big hit. And that's Germany closed all its plants.
I know there's designs of kind of mini nuclear plants.
Yeah, there got some new little ones.
To me, that's not necessarily again, to use their terminology, a high leverage approach. And there are definitely some potential downsides.
I always agreed with everything Sweden did. I like Swedish stuff, except the herd immunity. After they did the herd immunity,
Yeah, I lost.
I'm no longer going with Swedish technology.
I saw that their king recently came out and apologized for the response to the virus. So
That's a shame.
this is a busy slide, but if you just look at the highlighted parts again, no silver bullet. We have to have silver buckshot. Highest leverage thing is we've got to keep fossil fuels in the ground. We didn't talk about a rebound effect, but that's basically when you switch to energy sources, or when they become less expensive, there's a tendency for people to use more energy. So that tends to mitigate the effects to a degree of what you're trying to do. We talked a little bit about new technologies being too delayed in the short term to really make a big difference. We've talked about the long lifetime of fossil fuel infrastructure. We did see that other gases, methane and nitrous oxide, F gases, things like that, make a significant changes. And a carbon price is high leverage. And so just a few other examples of other problems that would be solved here. We would, Joe Biden has talked about this, but there's a lot of, this was back in 2014, they were projecting create 4 million jobs, reduce the unemployment rate just by going to more clean energy and energy efficiency. This again is historical from 2007 to 15. The health benefits from increased use of wind and solar were 2/3 of the total benefits, as opposed to avoided climate damages. Again, we might in the US prevent almost 300,000 deaths in this century from air pollution, or 30,000 emergency ER visits, or millions of work hours. On a global basis, we could prevent over 150 million premature deaths from air pollution by the end of the century, and save $1 trillion a year by transitioning things. So there's lots of encouraging things happening out there. To me, one of the take homes is from this is that we do have the tools we need. And the renewables are growing and getting cheaper. You have corporations, countries, states stepping up, and people in general are more educated. So these are some examples, some of the corporate commitments that have been made. This is carbon pricing types of things that are happening in the world right now. So they're covering about 22% global emissions. Unfortunately, you'll see a big kind of gray area over the United States. There's not much there yet. So hopefully we can start to fill some of that in with some color. And this is just a final slide. Just think about, there's different ways to make a difference from your own personal behaviors all the way out to running for public office, just voting and protesting. So anyway, that's the end of my presentation. I'll leave this up for a sec here and stop the share here. So other questions that I can answer for anyone about this program?
By the way, I put
Oh,
the domain, the URL in the chat. People saw that to get to the climateinteractive.org.
Yeah, and now Climate Interactive has other programs, other models. The En-ROADS came out less than 2 years ago, but they had one before that they still use called C-ROADS that is just a little different focus. And they have lots of different programs and ways to look at this. So again, that was one of the reasons I was attracted to this, is that it seemed like a good way to really understand how do we make a difference. So
Does anybody know how the league might be using this in their environmental committee?
who will?
The League of Women Voters.
Oh,
Don't know.
I don't know.
Does everyone understand why we're already at between 1.5 and 2 degrees? I mean, why we're stuck in that range? Is that, I mean, that's because we're living off of the climate from 30 years ago. It takes about 30 years for any changes
Yeah.
in emissions.
Yeah, the carbon dioxide is pretty long-lived. It's out there for many decades. Methane and some of the other gases don't last as long, but they have a stronger short-term effect. So that's why it's important to control them.
It's very important for us to remember that, because see, I don't know if I can show this graph, but you know, we're already, you look at 2020 will probably be the hottest year globally, but in Tucson, in our region, we've had a couple hot summers in a row. That's not going to go away for 20, 30 years, no matter what we do today to reduce emissions. So when you get back to Kurt's point about, you know, Barbara and the Physicians for Social Responsibility and the resilience to heat, we have to remember that we've got two things to do. We've got to be resilient now because our temperatures are continue to go up a notch, but every notch is hot, like we've seen 2020. And we also have to look to the future, 30 years hence, between now and 2030 start to reduce, so that in 2040 and 2050, the planet is the temperature is going to start to drop. So it's just not simple. And I just want to emphasize that we have to do things now to build resilience and to protect the planet 20, 30, 40 years from now.
Yeah, I would totally echo Karen's sentiments there. It's there's a lot of things that you can do, and I think you have to just find what resonates for you. And if you're one that wants to, interested in, and feel like you have skills in lobbying your members of Congress, you can get involved with Citizens Climate Lobby. I tend to like things that are more nature-based, so I've been working with Watershed Management Group and Sustainable Tucson's Habitat Restoration Program, things like that. So you just have to kind of find out where you fit in, but in terms of individual action, but again, there's corporate action that we need to take too, from the standpoint of pushing our elected leaders to do the right thing. So,
I mean, you know, look at the mayor's climate emergency declaration. And look at it from, like, look in the weeds here and say, well, that's great and 100% behind you, but do we have enough cooling centers for our population next summer? And especially for, you know, communities, underprivileged communities where they don't have a lot of trees. Are we making sure that those trees are being planted there first? So, you know, it's on the ground stuff we can do now and make sure our city pays attention to those needs. I'm sure it is, but it's just one of the things that we can do as community members.
right.
And I've heard different things about whether the reduced activity during the pandemic has made any significant difference. I've heard yes and no, both on that.
Yeah, I would say the same. I've heard kind of conflicting views. I think maybe there has been reduced emissions, but it's not enough to significantly change the trajectory where the temperature is going at this point.
Let me see if I can get this graph up here. Why not? Share screen. Okay, let's see. Here's something. Can you see this one right here?
Yeah,
Mhm.
So that shows from what, 1980, 1990? Oh, 1959. I gave my glass. Anyway, you can see here we are. And it was like 7% drop, something like that from the pandemic.
Mhm.
But it's not enough to do anything unless we continue it.
Mhm.
You know,
Right.
after, you know, in 6 months, we've already seen, I took a walk down Speedway, not down, near Speedway, in April or May, and took a photograph, and it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon and there were no cars on Speedway and near Country Club. So that's changed. You know, 2 months later, their traffic was back. So unfortunately, no. And I was really speaking again of climate when we had the Great Recession. It was a wonderful time for us to begin retooling some of our factories. You know, there was the auto industry had a lot of problems. We could have immediately started doing more electric. We didn't. We just went right back to our old habits. So that's
yeah.
a problem.
We lost some valuable time for sure.
Yeah.
I just feel like we at this point have an urgent responsibility to the generations that follow, that not leave them a planet that is inhospitable to living in any kind of decent way. So.
Didn't New York City just divest its pension fund from fossil fuels?
Cool. That's great.
Yeah, I think that's a significant way that individuals can make a difference too. There's more and more socially responsible funds out there that people are putting their, their retirement monies or whatever into, that have screens for environmental issues, like my wife and I have some of our funds in those types of funds, and they don't invest in any fossil fuel companies, for that matter, nuclear or other things too. So yeah, there's ways you can, and I know that's, I think it's 350.org is a big, that's one of their big pushes, is divestment from particularly fossil fuel companies. And also you should look at the banking institutions you use, because they bankroll a lot of this. So you can use that as a strategy too.
Well, our new head of the Department of the Interior was protesting at Standing Rock to prevent oil pipelines and cooking for people there.
Yeah, that was encouraging to see. I thought that was pretty groundbreaking to nominate her for that.
Wasn't it? Oh, that's terrific.
Exciting.
Yeah, I think it's about time that Indigenous people had a stronger voice in kind of what's happening to our lands.
Yeah.
And to their lands, which is, it's remarkable to have a tribal member overseeing tribal issues and tribal lands. It's wonderful. It's the way it should be.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, thanks. This is a really exciting model. I'm going to share it with a couple of college folks I know and see who else it can be shared with. I think it's got good insight.
Yeah, and I'm glad to do other presentations. Just let me know.
Are you giving us your email or something? Or
Yeah, I can do that. I'll just put it in the chat.
thanks.
I'm glad you saw that. I mean, that's the whole idea, is to share some of the things that we talk about here at Climate Tucson, to share them. Whenever I hear like somebody attended one of the programs and told me the next day that she went on a hike and she and her friends were talking about what they learned, that's the whole point, is we need to spread this information. I was telling Kurt, I just read some statistic about, quite a few Americans are concerned about the climate. They understand the problem. And it was something like 60%, but maybe 10% of them are doing anything about it. And a lot of that has to do with, they just don't know where to go to learn information or what to read. So the Biden administration, one of its big pushes will be public education. So we're going to start seeing a lot of climate education news coming out of various departments like NOAA. So they're going to push that.
And then the Glasgow summit, which follows up from the Paris summit, is next November.
Right.
So, and I hear that they are expecting the message is all the countries, the signatories, and unfortunately we'll be back in the accord at that point. They're going to expect more aggressive goals for the countries to strive for. And I know I saw Greta Thunberg being interviewed the other day, and she was saying all these goals and things are fine, but we need action. And so, and that's part of the thing, it's transferring it into action at the local level and local and regional.